through the southern border, but weak immigration laws into our country. So we as American citizens have the duty to be vigilant that if you see something, you report it. If there's any belief that somebody may be radicalized, you report it. If not, if we don't ensure that people that come to our country, assimilate to our
CYN.
norms, our cultural values, then this is going to continue to go wrong. And it is very hard for the intel community to find these needles in a haystack, these lone wolves. Right. So that vigilance, it's the duty of every American.
It certainly is, yeah. And Tulsi Gabbard, John Ratcliffe, Kash Patel, our top intel chiefs are going to be testifying tomorrow on this very topic on Capitol Hill. So we will all be listening to that with great interest. Mike, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox
CYN.
News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.
Major stock up alert. My family's favorite snack is on sale right now. 30 for $36, or you can double it for
CJMB.
Iran's new supreme leader vowing to continue blocking the strait, pushing crude oil briefly above $100 a barrel this week. But Secretary of War Pete Hegseth on Friday saying Tehran is running out of options and that the new leader has been injured and disfigured.
They are exercising sheer desperation in the Straits of Hormuz. Something we're dealing with. We're on plan to defeat, destroy, disable
CJMB.
all of their meaningful military capabilities at a pace the world has never seen before. Soon and very soon, all of Iran's defense companies will be destroyed.
The Trump administration also temporarily lifting sanctions on Russian oil shipments and saying that the U.S. will begin tapping over 170 million barrels, taking it out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as early as next week. The International Energy Agency also announcing an unprecedented emergency release of 400 million barrels of oil from global reserves. Joining me now to weigh in on all of this is House Energy Committee and House Homeland Security Committee member, Texas Congressman August Pfluger. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us this weekend.
Rhea, great to see you, and thanks for having me.
And I should point out that you served nearly 2 decades in the Air Force. You flew combat missions in the Middle East. Thank you for your service to this great nation. How would you assess this war?
Well, first off, President Trump made the right decision. I mean, this is a terror regime that for almost 50 years has been sowing chaos throughout the region and throughout the world, has killed thousands of Americans in that same time period. I myself saw, while flying combat missions, the weapons that were being moved from Tehran into Lebanon and other places to threaten Israel, to threaten the United States. So President Trump made the right decision. And I think militarily it's going very well. I mean, the objectives to destroy their Navy, destroy their missiles, destroy their ability to sow terror throughout the region are going very well. This is a tough and complex problem. They're willing to shoot missiles into their neighboring cities, into the ports, into airports like Dubai. And so it's a tough problem. So can you imagine them getting nuclear weapons? I'm very proud of our service members. Obviously, the loss of life is tragic, and we pray for those service members, not only those who are willing to give their lives, but unfortunately those who have.
So what else could be done? I mean, Russia could be one of the biggest winners in all of this as global oil prices are spiking. The Financial Times reported that Moscow is earning as much as $150 million a day in extra budget revenue from oil sales. It could receive nearly $5 billion in overall additional revenues by the end of March. I know you wrote a letter to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent urging the department to ensure any sale of Russian energy giant Lukoil's international assets permanently cut Moscow's leadership out of the deal. Can that be done?
Well, for 6 years since I've been elected, we've been pressing the Biden administration in the first 4 years to do more on the sanctions against Russia, to not allow those revenues to go directly into their coffers, which feed their war machine and the chaos that is going on between Russia and Ukraine. In the divestment of Lukoil, specifically, what we are urging, and Secretary Bessent is all over this, but we want to make sure that when those assets are divested, that they don't just once again be resold back into Russian hands in the form of some other named company, which has happened previously, and obviously they would try to do again. So the administration is taking the right steps. We don't want the revenues to go to Russia, and the divestment of Lukoil should not just be recycled once again into their hands. We need to make sure that those revenues are cut off.
Yeah, well, look, there's also the cost to American citizens as oil and gas prices go higher. This is colliding with your efforts to rein in inflation going into the midterm elections. How are you going to deal with that?
Well, I think the hope is right now, and market fundamentals, when you look at oil futures, seem to suggest the stability is below $90, $80, that it's more reasonable. And you and I have talked about that $65 to $85 band where it's reasonable to produce, and it's also a good trade-off for the economy and gas prices. So I think the hope is that this is a temporary problem. And the supply right now is not the issue. It's the movement of that supply, specifically out of the Arabian Gulf. I have flown missions in the F-22 over the Strait of Hormuz. It's a very strategic place. It's a very difficult regime is still threatening that strait. So not just naval assets getting in and out, but also commercial ships and oil tankers, natural gas tankers that are moving in and out are threatened. And I think that's the issue right now. So supply seems to be not the issue. It's more the logistical movement of that supply to the places it needs to go, which hopefully then gives us back that more stable and slightly lower prices for the future.
Well, let's talk about the cost of all of this. We know that the Pentagon says that the Iran war cost $11 billion in the first week. We know that the president is looking for a defense supplemental package here. How much is that going to be? And of course, then, I wonder if all of this, the president's $1.5 trillion defense budget, can this go into Republicans are unveiling what looks like a framework for a second reconciliation bill that they say could focus on restoring affordability for working families. Are you on board?
Well, absolutely. As chairman of the Republican Study Committee, we are the organization that drafted what we think the roadmap is, and it centers around affordability. Obviously does not exclude defense. Democrats are unwilling to do anything right now. They're unwilling to fund DHS. They will be unwilling to fund the military. I think if President Trump cured cancer, they'd be unwilling to vote for that. So we do have to take this seriously, and I think reconciliation is the only tool and the only mechanism available, which then supersedes the need for 60 votes, reduces that threshold to 51, and allows us to get things done that are good for this country, namely the security of this country. Maria, lastly, I'll say on reconciliation, we were elected to do hard things, to solve hard problems. Anybody can give 1,000 reasons why we can't do something, but we're here to figure out why we can and how we can, and reconciliation falls into that category.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, initially there was so much pushback on a reconciliation package, and I didn't understand why. I didn't understand. I mean, isn't this your last shot before the midterms to actually get more done?
It is. I mean, and we should be applauding President Trump's wins from last year, all the while sending the message that we're not done, that there's more work to be done. Yes, we can claim victory on certain aspects, but we're going to continue. And in fact, not just continue, we are never going to give up fighting for every single American, whether it's the cost of things, the affordability of things, or the security of this great country. We are not going to stop. And reconciliation, unfortunately, we'd love to do something bipartisan, but Democrats have shown through this DHS shutdown that they're unwilling to vote for anything. This is the only mechanism that I believe we can get something done and continue to fight for every American.
Wow, this is just extraordinary. Congressman, thank you very much. We'll be watching your work on all of it. Thank you, sir.
These are the best non-toxic pants on the planet. After testing literally everything out there, I finally found what I've been looking for.
After nearly 10 days of power outages, the anger of the people in Cuba has gone beyond protests and has turned into arson at the local Communist Party headquarters. As night fell, residents took to the streets. Initially, they expressed their discontent with the Latin American tradition of carcerolazo, banging pots and pans. The sound of metal clashing echoed through the streets, and the lights from cell phones created a flickering sea. The crowd then stormed the party headquarters, carrying out furniture, office equipment, computers, propaganda posters, and photos from the Castro era. They piled up the items and set them on fire. The flames rose quickly, lighting up the surrounding crowd as chants of libertad, freedom, abajo la dictadura, down with the dictatorship, patria y vida, homeland and life, and curses against communism filled the air. On the evening of March 13th, according to a video shared by the X account Visioner, protesters broke into the headquarters of the Cuban Communist Party in the Moron city of Ciego de Avila province and set it on fire. During the protest, gunshots were heard. A 16-year-old boy was shot in the leg. The Cuban Minister of the Interior confirmed that 5 people were arrested. Local media reported that the incident had evolved from a peaceful exchange into destructive behavior. International media described it as a rare public dissent and a symbolic scene of burning the party headquarters in the streets. This incident has sparked heated discussions in Chinese-speaking communities. Some netizens commented, "Is Cuba on the verge of change? Where there are protests, there's hope. And 2026, the year communism will be destroyed." Others pointed out the symbolic significance of the event. Burning the party headquarters is like the people openly declaring, "We do not recognize your legitimacy." Chinese blogger Sydney Idol expressed, "Has the Chinese Communist Party seen this? Before the Chinese people lose their patience, they should quickly lay down their weapons and surrender to the people. Dissolve the Communist Party. Lift the ban on parties and the media, and hold national elections. Power should return to the people. I also advise all Chinese Communist Party officials to return the money they stole from corruption and lay down their weapons without being killed. This could leave a way out for you party members." It's clear that the Chinese Communist Party, which supports Cuba, is also worried. On March 12th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had a phone conversation with Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parilla. Rodriguez Parilla briefed him on the current situation in Cuba and thanked China for its support. Both sides agreed to continue advancing their bilateral relations. On March 8th, Chinese state media, the Global Times, published an article with Alberto Blanco Silva, the Cuban ambassador to China. Silva claimed that Cuba would deepen its cooperation with China in a new 5-year plan, focusing on energy, mining, food production, biotechnology, tourism, and more. He also emphasized the partnership between the two countries under the Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Development Initiative. But these are just empty words. As the situation in Cuba continues to unfold, the Chinese Communist Party must already be concerned that all of its investments in Cuba could go to waste. Since the U.S. captured former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in January, Cuba has lost its most important foreign aid source and is facing a severe energy crisis. On March 8th, Havana International Airport issued an aviation notice, stating that all 9 international airports in Cuba would face fuel shortages starting from February 10th. The oil embargo has completely paralyzed Cuba. There have been widespread blackouts across the country, with Havana experiencing a 15-hour blackout in one day. Hospitals are relying on backup generators to keep running, while bakeries have been forced to bake bread using firewood. The food supply is rapidly diminishing. By March 14th, the nationwide blackout in Cuba entered its 8th day. In the continued darkness, Havana residents took to the streets late at night, holding up their phones and protesting while banging pots and pans in anger. Neil Berg, an Iranian Jewish woman, shared images of Cubans protesting in the dark. She posted, "This is Cuba now. Cubans and Venezuelans are some of the only people on earth who truly understands Iranians. Freedom sparks freedom. May all our nations be liberated this year." In response to this desperation, Cuban President Diaz-Canel announced on March 13th that he would seek talks with Washington for the first time. Canel publicly acknowledged that he was engaging in serious and sensitive negotiations with the Trump administration. He said, "These talks have been aimed at finding solutions through dialogue to the bilateral differences between our two countries." Canel expressed hope that the negotiations would help both longtime adversaries move past confrontation. Taiwanese writer Wang Hao commented on Facebook, stating that from Iran in the Middle East to Cuba in Latin America, the Chinese Communist Party's anti-American dictatorial alliance has collapsed. Trump proved with power that the United States can eliminate any regime that refuses to comply. This marks the biggest shift of the island since the 1959 Cuban Revolution and the establishment of a communist regime with full economic nationalization in the 1960s.
Are you researching dental implants?
There's a lot of dental offices that'll talk about doing their teeth in the
Marco Rubio, a Cuban American and U.S. Secretary of State, may be holding secret talks with high-level officials in Havana. In a video of a high-level meeting of the Cuban Communist Party recorded on the evening of March 12, President Miguel Díaz-Canel stated that he is leading negotiations for Cuba, along with former President Raúl Castro and other officials. He did not disclose who from the U.S. side is participating or mention the time or location of the talks. Previously, President Trump had stated multiple times that the U.S. was having high-level talks with Cuban representatives. The Cuban government denied having any formal meetings, but did not specifically deny media reports about secret talks between the U.S. and Raúl Castro's grandson, Raúl Guillermo Rodriguez Castro. The 41-year-old Castro appeared in the March 13th press conference video, sitting behind Díaz-Canel. Given that he holds no senior party position, his appearance was considered unusual. Just before the March 13th press conference, Cuba also announced that it would release 51 prisoners in the coming days, as per an agreement made with the Vatican. This release took place just 2 weeks after the Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez met with Pope Leo XIV at the Vatican. This shift is believed to be the result of external pressure. The Castro family story mirrors the history of Cuba's communist movement. The Castro family, primarily referring to the revolutionary leader Fidel Castro and his brother Raúl, has long dominated Cuba's political, military, and Communist Party leadership since the success of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. They ruled the country for nearly 60 years. From 1959 to 2008, Fidel ruled. From 2008 to 2018, Raúl took over as president. From 2018 to 2021, Raúl remained as the first secretary of the Cuban Communist Party until he handed power over to Miguel Díaz-Canel, a non-Castro family member, marking the official end of the Castro era. Currently, some of the Castro family's descendants still hold influence in the military, security agencies, or social organizations, but they have largely withdrawn from the highest power core. There's also division within the family, with some members in exile in the U.S. and others staying in Cuba. Interestingly, after the U.S. military's raid on January 3rd to capture Venezuelan President Maduro, Cuban President Díaz-Canel remained defiant. News footage showed Díaz-Canel encouraging the Cuban people to fight for Venezuela. At the time, netizens joked, "Here comes another one making tough statements. Come catch me." For a long time, Venezuela has supported the Cuban regime by providing cheap oil. In return, Cuba has offered security to Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro, with Cuban intelligence agents active in Venezuela, helping the Maduro regime suppress uprisings, detect coup plots, and eliminate so-called disloyal officers and government officials to ensure Maduro stays in power. However, during the U.S. military action earlier this year, these security personnel were ineffective, and many Cubans who were protecting Maduro lost their lives. Cuba's relationship with China also attracts attention. Cuba is one of the few remaining communist allies of the Chinese Communist Party. In 2018, Cuba joined China's Belt and Road Initiative. On May 9, 2025, during a visit to Moscow, Chinese General Secretary Xi Jinping met with Cuban President Díaz-Canel. Xi claimed that China is willing to strengthen its ironclad friendship with Cuba. Díaz-Canel stated that Cuba and China are close friends and brothers. Since 2025, official interactions between China and Cuba have remained frequent and close. Díaz-Canel visited China from September 2nd to 6th and attended the September 3rd military parade in Beijing, where he met with Xi Jinping and Politburo Standing Committee member Li Xi. Díaz-Canel also signed additional Belt and Road Initiative-related agreements with China. China has significantly increased exports to Cuba, including solar panels, batteries, and generators. It has also promised to help Cuba build 92 solar panel plants by 2028. But now, the dictators in Havana have finally realized that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, communism is increasingly being rejected worldwide, and any promises from China are just historical rubbish. Cuba, China's old friend, is on the verge of a historical turning point. Some bloggers believe that Cuba now has two choices: either stick with the rigid ideology and sink together, or compromise with Washington. The U.S. has not sent a single soldier, but is using maximum economic pressure to crack open the last piece of communist resistance in the Western Hemisphere. When a regime starts releasing political prisoners and talking about openness, it usually means it can't turn back. Some Chinese netizens say, evil communism is doomed to be eliminated. President Trump's tactic of cutting the skirts has been extremely successful. Once the little brother is done, it's time for the big brother. Independent media personality Tang Jingyuan stated that Cuba, which had been completely anti-American, is now openly seeking peace with the U.S., a move that clearly reflects a sense of helplessness under extreme pressure. In the past, Cuba was supported by China, Venezuela, and Russia. But now all three of these countries are too preoccupied with their own crises. Russia is embroiled in the war with Ukraine. China is facing internal and external challenges, and Xi Jinping is now too afraid to offend Trump. Iran has been severely beaten by the US, and China doesn't even dare to extend a hand to help, let alone a small country like Cuba. Tang Jingyuan believes this is also related to Trump's Monroe Doctrine. The first cornerstone of the Monroe Doctrine is to clear America's backyard and ensure that the Americas are for Americans, not allowing foreign forces, especially the Chinese Communist Party, to interfere. Therefore, Cuba could never escape this. Of course, Trump doesn't need to use military force. He can resolve the Cuban issue in a more peaceful manner. Tang Jingyuan said that Cuba has survived for so many years partly because communist forces were very powerful in the past, and successive U.S. governments have been appeasing and weak. The Cuban Missile Crisis was when the Soviet Union strongly supported Cuba, and the U.S. only imposed sanctions on Cuba without directly sending troops. If the U.S. had sent troops back then, Cuba might have already been finished. Why has Trump been able to so smoothly move Cuba? Because Trump has watched for decades, and he has seen through the communist forces' cards. He is very clear and determined that this is how it should be done. Once Cuba becomes a pro-American regime, there will be concerns about the impact on the Chinese Communist Party. Commentator Du Zheng believes that the first thing to be affected is the Chinese Communist Party's listening stations in Cuba, which will soon be dismantled because they directly threaten U.S. security. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union had many listening stations in Cuba to gather intelligence.
RDW. CYN. CYN. CYN.
NSRX.
CYN.
CYN.
POET.